Hi there, I'm Hamish McAlpine, Oxentia's Principal Consultant, here with this autumn's HE Roundup. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is a new report by University of Cambridge's University and Commercialisation Policy Evidence Unit. This was a really comprehensive report looking at the really thorny question of equity stakes in university spin-outs and what's the right number. And I think this report's great because it's put a lot of evidence around this. So, for example, it's got very clear evidence that depending on the amount of intellectual property that goes into the spin-out and the level of support received from the university, typical equity stakes are around between 5 and 20%. But I think the other really important point about the report, which it makes very clearly, is that the initial stake taken by the university really doesn't tell the full picture. So what we refer to as the initial stake is pre-dilution, it's pre-raising money, and often what the report makes very clear is that by the time the spin-out is raising money, that equity stake, that initial stake, gets diluted very quickly down to single digits, typically around 5%. So will this mean that the debate on equity stakes goes away? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of sort of nuance and subtlety around the debate. But what that report's been absolutely fantastic for is bringing that nuance and reinforcing that message that we can't just fixate on the initial equity stake the university takes. We need to take a much sort of more broader and more holistic view of how universities can best support their spin-outs. Nonetheless, it provides some really sound evidence, which is great to see and much needed. So the other thing that I found really fascinating over the couple of months is the revision to the research and development expenditure figures produced by the Office for National Statistics here in the UK. So I think I've probably talked in previous roundups about the UK government's desire to boost R&D spending to 2.4% of GDP as a target. Now, the revisions to both business R&D expenditure and now very recent ones to higher education R&D expenditure means that effectively the UK's already made this target. And ostensibly that should be great news, that we're much more R&D intensive than we thought due to the revisions in the way the Office for National Statistics has counted how much expenditure there is. But thinking about it, what's really important about that target and why the government were interested in that target is because we were thinking that R&D intensity drives increases in things like productivity, but productivity hasn't really changed. So in some ways, boosting how we're counting R&D expenditure and counting more of it more accurately, but staying with the same productivity actually kind of makes that problem worse. I think I haven't really fully bottomed out the sort of policy and funding implications that are going to come with this, but nonetheless I think it's really fascinating, and I'm very keen to keep an eye on that as that develops and the policy and funding implications filter through. So the final point I'd like to discuss for this autumn's roundup is, again, sticking on economic theme. Not just in the UK, but in many countries at the moment, inflation is running at really quite high levels. So double-digit levels of consumer price inflation in the UK. Now, this obviously has a very direct effect on universities in terms of, they're buyers of goods and services, and they have to pay salaries, and there's upward pressure on salaries there. So there's that kind of direct cost pressure on universities. But perhaps the more significant effect on universities is that inflation eroding the actual real terms value of their tuition fees. So tuition fees for home-based students in the UK have remained just above £9,000 for many years. And particularly in this high inflation environment, the purchasing power, what that tuition fee buys the university, is a lot less. Now, of course, that's of direct relevance to universities, but it's also of relevance to research and knowledge exchange, because sometimes, there's not like completely separate pots of money in universities, and sometimes there are these cross subsidies that operate. And I think it really underlines the importance that if there's not going to be a large increase in tuition fees to keep them in pace with inflation anytime soon, the importance of universities having to think about how to diversify their income, possibly through knowledge exchange with industry and business partners, and how to build that resilience in the face of some really significant funding challenges. So despite good increases in R&D spending and budgets, a good settlement at the recent spending review, there remains really a lot of pressure on universities' finances, making that knowledge exchange and commercialisation piece all the more important to consider. So that's the Autumn Higher Education Roundup. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in anything we've talked about today and you'd like to discuss it further, please feel free to get in touch via the website or our social channels. And all that remains for me to say is a massive thank you to the clients we've worked at over the past year, both here in the UK and all over the world. Wishing everyone a really happy holidays and look forward to engaging with you more in the new year.